What's good, Tristan Talks family? Today, I hope you all are well. Drinking some water before I get up here and talk at your head for about 20 minutes. Hope you are well. I just got done with my first class of a Friday of today, and we talked about Rosa Luxemburg and the Russian Revolution. The synopsis I got from it is to always uphold democratic principles. That doesn't just mean vote every 2 to 4 years. That means politics happens every second, every minute, every hour, every day. You have to constantly uphold democratic ideals, or corruption and all this thing we are seeing today will still persist. With that being said, that has nothing to do with today's talk. But we're talking about genocide. And I'm really focused on totalitarianism. And genocide and the Holocaust and Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, Franco's Spain and fascism, all that fun stuff with Mussolini, the creator of said fascism, Hannah Arendt, the creator of totalitarianism, not through her power, but through her ideas. And we're going to be talking genocide. And genocide and totalitarianism works in the same correct way, but totalitarianism didn't persist because of the Holocaust. No, it was an example of totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is what we call, you can call it anything. You can call it imperialism. But the thing is, I don't know if you watched the Origins of Totalitarianism, my video on that. It's about 54 minutes. You don't really have to watch the whole thing. I would appreciate it if you watched the whole thing. But I talked about how the Holocaust wasn't exclusively to Germany. Germany was already committing genocide in African countries. African countries were the playbook of the Holocaust. It was a training field, and the Holocaust was the game. Now, I'm not making fun of the genocides. I'm putting it in layman terms. But I'm now talking about genocide because one of my professors, he wrote a book on genocide. It's called Genocide, a Thematic Approach. And so the title of today's video is going to be, They Called It Never Again, so why does it keep happening? So when's the last time someone used the word genocide and actually stopped and thought about what that word means? Not just felt bad about it, but actually thought about it. Because here's what I've noticed. We throw the word around in the news and arguments online and history class, and most of the time we have this very specific image in our heads when we hear it. We think about gas chambers, train tracks, and Holocaust. Train tracks meaning Russian. And sure, that's not wrong, but the Holocaust was absolutely a genocide, yes. But if I told you that image, the single image, was deliberately engineered by some of the most powerful governments on earth to make sure that they never had to be held accountable for what they were doing to people all around the world. Because this is what exactly happened. We're going to get into all that. What genocide actually means, the legal definition got corrupted before the ink even dried, why the totalitarianism debate we've been having connects directly to this, and why Gaza, Ukraine, and Uyghurs are forcing the whole world to ask questions all over again. So the word genocide was invented by one man, a Polish-Jewish legal scholar named Raphael Lemkin. And the first thing you need to know about Lemkin is that he didn't coin the word because of the Holocaust. He'd been thinking about this problem for over a decade before the Nazis came to power. What set him off was the Armenian genocide in 1915. The Ottoman Empire's systematic extermination of the Armenian population, up to 1.5 million people, and the fact that nobody in the international community had any legal framework to call it a crime, or let alone stop it or punishment. Lemkin combined the Greek word. I'm thinking Lenin because I've been talking about Vladimir Lenin so much lately. Forgive me. But he combined the Greek word genus, meaning race or kin, with the Latin word side, meaning the act of killing, and published his landmark book called The Axis Rule in Occupied Europe in 1944. But here's the really important stuff. Lemkin's, not Lenin, holy, definition of genocide was way, way broader than most people think. For Lemkin, genocide was not only about mass killing, it was about the destruction of essential foundations of groups' life. their culture, their language, their institutions, their ability to exist as a person. He wrote that to kill a people, you do not necessarily have to kill people. You need to destroy the only social connections and cultural bonds that make them a people. And this is how we get into totalitarianism, which I'll get in more depth as this video goes along. You're destroying the language, you're destroying cultural institutions, forcing children to assimilation schools, banning religious practice. All of this for Lemkin was genocide. The mass killing was the final stage of a process, not the definition of it. He described it as a gradual process that may begin with political disenfranchisement, economic displacement, and cultural undermining and control. The destruction of leadership and the breakup of families and the prevention of propagation. The actual physical destruction, Lemkin said, is the last and most effective phase. So genocide in Lemkin's mind was less an event and more a system, a coordinated plan to actually erase people. Now, why does this actually matter? Like, why do we care about all this stuff? Because the legal definition that ended up in international law, not editing this out, just making sure, like, I'm good. Because the legal definition that ended up in international law that every politician in court uses today is nothing like what Lemkin actually meant, because nobody likes to read anymore. But the 1948 convention got gutted. Okay, after World War II, there were finally a momentum to make a genocide an international crime. In 1946, the newly founded United Nations passed Resolution 96, right? Largely written by Lemkin himself, Raphael Lemkin himself, which broadly defined genocide as the dental right of existence of entire human groups. Sure, that sounds great, but then the major powers got involved. You know who I'm talking about. Over the next 2 years, as delegates hammered out the actual text of the Genocide Convention, which was adopted in December 9th. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my shoes off. Adopted in December 9th, 1948. Hold on, I got all this. I'm stemming. The original vision in 1948 and December 9th at the Genocide Convention got dismantled systematically. And the culprits were not the villains of World War II, even though they were the winners of World War II. So the United States insisted that language about cultural genocide be removed because they didn't want the treatment of Native Americans or the ongoing lynching of black Americans to qualify. One U.S. official literally said they were worried about the convention might cause difficulties with cases such as lynching. The Soviet Union insisted that political groups be excluded from the definition because Stalin had personally approved the mass murders of hundreds of thousands of political opponents, and he wasn't about to let a UN document call that genocide. Let's be real. And Britain and France fought to make sure their colonial policies across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East couldn't be touched either. A scholar named by Christopher Powell said the wording of the convention was shaped by the desire of its framers, not to criminalize their own behavior. So what did they do? They held up the Holocaust as the prototype, the gold standard, the thing that the genocide has to look like before anyone has to act. The Holocaust made it seem that killing was the end-all be-all of all genocides. But by doing that, they made it impossible to call anything else genocide because nothing looks like quite the Holocaust. Nothing is so bad as the Holocaust. The final 1948 definition protects only 4 groups: national, ethnic, racial, and religious. This requires proof of explicit intent to destroy those groups, and says nothing about the cultural destruction of political groups, none of that, social groups. The whole Lemkin idea of forced cultural erasure being the point of genocide was completely stripped out by the powers of the winners of the World War II. And so the United States didn't even ratify this convention until 1988, 40 years later, and only after attaching so many reservations and understandings that it essentially made itself immune, the United States made itself immune from prosecution under it. And so here's what we're talking about, the totalitarianism problem. Now this is where I want to bring in something that I've been talking about and we've been talking about for a minute, because it connects directly all together. The concept of totalitarianism, especially since the Cold War, to group Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union together as basically the same type of state. Same structure, same logic, both equally monstrous, both equally evil. Well, I'm not gonna say evil, but both equally bad. I'm gonna I'm simplifying it, but it's way more deeper than that. There are real structural similarities. I mean, the single party rule, a secret police, mass terror, the suppression of civil society, and a cult of personality, sure. But if you watch my video on Hannah Arendt, she makes a genuinely compelling case that both regimes represented something new and unprecedented in human history, not just ordinary dictatorships. The problem is that the timing of when this argument became most popular is not a coincidence. The totalitarianism framework exploded as a mainstream concept in the late 1940s and late 1950s, right when the Cold War was heating up, right? And the grouping the USSR with Nazi Germany was enormously convenient for Western liberal ideology, because it meant you could discredit any socialist alternative to capitalism by associating it with the most universally condemned regime in modern history, the USSR. But this isn't just the left saying this. Serious mainstream historians have raised it too. Who benefits from this actual framing? The question, this is the real property question which matters here. Nazi Germany enshrined private property rights. German industrialists like Krupp, I.G. Farben, Dyson funded the Nazi regime and profited from it massively. The Soviet Union abolished private ownership of the means of production. These are not ideological differences. They represented fundamentally different theories about whose interests the state serves, right? And so when you connect this back to genocide, it gets more interesting. Because the 1948 Genocide Convention, which we just established, was designed to protect the interests of the major powers. But it was also used as a Cold War weapon. The U.S. wanted to keep political groups in the definition so they could use it as a cudgel against the Soviets. The Soviets wanted it out to protect themselves. Both sides were playing politics with bodies of genocide victims. And I'm going to be really careful here. Because they might get me on this one. But none of this means we should dismiss or minimize Soviet atrocities. The Holodomor, which is the same thing as ICE, well, not the same thing, but it's on the same branch. The deportation of the entire peoples of Siberia. They called it the Great Purge. These were horrific crimes, and victims deserve to have them recognized. I just said I would be careful here, and I just connected that to the ICE. Cut me off. Cut the show. We're done. No, I'm trolling, but that is a mistake I made. These were horrific crimes, and the victims deserve to have them recognized, right? Not swept aside in service of anyone's political narrative. The Great Purge was swept under so they could fit, so the Soviets could minimize their atrocities, right? But when we recognize this ideological baggage of the totalitarianism concept, doesn't mean we have to pretend it was invented in a vacuum. Concepts have origins. They have purposes. And the purpose of this one, in the Cold War context, was to largely serve the Western liberal foreign policy. But the honest position, I think, is to hold both things at once, right? Yes, both regimes are capable of extraordinary systematic violence against their own populations, and collapsing them into a single category obscures real and important differences in their social basis. Their relationships to capital and their specific logic of violence, the concept is a partial description, not an explanation. You're just describing these regimes. You're not explaining these regimes. That is why it's easy to lump them together. But here's the same playbook right now. So here's where it is. Here's where it stops being a history lesson and starts feeling real, reality. Because right now in 2025 and into 2026, we are watching multiple situations that are forcing humanity to ask the same exact questions. What is genocide? Who gets to call it that? And who gets to act with impunity? We're going to talk about the Uyghurs. I think I'm saying that right. In China, hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs are predominantly Muslim, Turkic-speaking ethnic minority. They have been imprisoned in what the Chinese government calls the re-education centers. They're forced to abandon their language. The women have been subjected to forced sterilization and abortions. The children have been removed from their families and placed in state-run boarding schools designed to culturally assimilate them. There's no mass extermination in the Holocaust sense, and that's why exactly China keeps saying it's not genocide. But run it through Limkin's original definition, not the watered-down 1948 one. This is textbook genocide. The deliberate destruction of people's cultural cohesion, their language, their religious practice, their ability to reproduce as a group. It doesn't need gas chambers to make genocide. This is the whole point Limkin is trying to make. The United States formally declared it genocide in January of 2021, on the last day of the first Trump administration. But the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act aside, the international community has been cautious. No one has really been stepping up and saying anything because China is a nuclear power and a massive trading power. What does that sound like? I'm not going to tell you. You have to figure that out. Ukraine. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which began in 2022, have produced documented war crimes on a massive scale. The killing and torture of civilians, the bombing of civilian infrastructure, and the sexual violence committed by Russian troops. But perhaps the most genocidal act under the actual text of the 1948 Convention is the forced transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin himself over this. At least 250,000 forcibly relocated Ukrainians were children. Many have been placed in Russian families or in state orphanage, subjected to Russian language and pro-Russian indoctrination, with the explicit goal stated openly by the Kremlin propagandists of stripping them of their Ukrainian identity. One Kremlin propagandist, I don't know how to say his name, Timothy something, published a piece in April 2022 calling for the extermination of a larger part of the Ukrainian population, with the remainder to be denazified over the course of a generation. He has since been charged by Ukrainian authorities with the direct and public incitement to commit genocide. The UN Human Rights Council, an independent commission, found in 2023 that while they could not definitively establish genocidal intent, the high legal bar we talked about, they were following all kinds of evidence and noted that certain statements in Russian media raised serious questions about if it's genocide or not. But Putin has been since charged with a crime of aggression and war crimes. And since Russia withdrew from the Rome statute in the ICC, this doesn't fit into the idea of genocide. He will never or almost certainly stand trial for this. In Gaza, I'm not going to pretend that this isn't one of the most contested of the three, because it absolutely is. But I also think that it's one of the most that clearly illustrates exactly the mechanisms I've just been talking about. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas carried out a horrific attack on Israeli citizens, right? Or civilians, killing over 1,200 people, taking hostages, committing acts that multiple scholars and jurists have described as genocidal in character. That is real, and that is not in dispute. I agree that is real. What followed after, look, y'all gonna be telling me, look, that's all y'all think, that's all I'm gonna say. Y'all think I'm a propaganda machine and not gonna tell the whole side of the story. I'm gonna tell the whole side of the story. What followed after was Israel's military campaign in Gaza, which in December 2004 has killed over 46,000 Palestinians, and at least 20,000 of them being children. More than 1 million people out of a population of 2.3 million was forcibly displaced. Schools, hospitals, mosques, and civilian infrastructure was destroyed, systematically destroyed. And on December 29, 2003, South Africa filed a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, charging genocide. On January 26, 2004, the ICJ ruled that the case was plausible, meaning that there was enough evidence to warrant full investigation in order Israel to take all measures in its power to prevent genocide and ensure humanitarian aid reach Gaza. Right? Israeli officials have made statements describing Gazans as human animals, calling for total siege. No electricity, no food, no fuel. The ICJ specifically noted these statements in its ruling. In the United States, here comes the United States, which has the power to enforce or deny any ICJ order through the UN Security Council, continued to provide military aid and diplomacy cover for Israel throughout. This is the exact dynamic people are making, scholars like Jeffrey Bachman are making. Ward about when they wrote that the major powers had used the Genocide Convention to establish a culture of impunity for themselves. The countries with the most power to prevent genocide are also the countries with the most power to able to insulate themselves and their allies from accountability under it. That's it. You don't have to hold these people accountable because you have already made it where you have so much power in this UN that you can't call it genocide. Because the United States is already aiding and abetting in said genocide. So I'm not going to call it genocide when the US does it, or when Israel does it, or when Russia does it, or when China does it, because these are major global powers with major trade networks. Of course I'm going to make them look pretty. So the solution, right? Let me try to bring this home. When Lincoln understood in what frames of the 1948 Convention deliberately buried, right? It was deliberately buried. Is that the genocide is not a rare monstrosity, aberration committed by uniquely evil actors. It is a recurring feature of how powerful states and groups assert dominance over other states. It happens through colonialism, through forced assimilation, through targeted starvation, through the erasure of language and culture, and yes, sometimes through mass extermination. The reason the totalitarian concept got so much traction during the Cold War is not because of the most analytical, rigorous framework. It is because it was useful. It served a political purpose. And we should be able to hold both things in mind, that both the USSR and Nazi Germany were capable of this state violence, and that the framework comparing them was built in a context that served specific ideological interests. And the reason the international community moves slowly or not at all on Gaza, on the Uyghurs, on Ukraine, is not because the legal bar is genuinely hard to clear. It's because the countries with the power to act are also the countries with the most to lose from a world where genocide actually has the consequences for powerful states. And this is what the book is talking about, Genocide, a Thematic Approach by Thomas Porter, which is my professor, and John Cox. You are the ones who have been left to solve, we are the ones who have been left to solve this problem. The structural impediments to preventing and punishing genocide were not accidents, they were divine. And redesigning them or building them is the work of people who understood how that design happened. So we have to learn the history and don't accept the 1948 Convention as its actual version. Don't let anyone use a narrow legal definition written by people protecting their own interest as a reason to look away from what's happening right now. That's the video. Drop a comment if you disagree with me, especially if you disagree with me. I genuinely want to hear it. Thank you. Peace.